The air is still cold, heavy, heavy with the smell of night. You don't see fire yet, but you feel his presence. The house is silent, except for a low, almost rhythmic sound, the rub of stone against stone, starting before the sun even rises. You are in a kitchen, but there is no bench, there is no stove, there is no oven, and that changes everything. Your feet touch the dirt floor, still damp from the night's cold. The surrounding walls are not smooth. They are irregular, partially carved into the limestone rock itself. Archaeologists discovered that many homes in first-century Galilee were literally dug out of Nari limestone, a type of soft stone that could be shaped with simple tools and hardened over time. And that means that the place where you are was not built as you imagine. It was excavated. Now the smell starts to change. A dense mixture fills the air, light smoke, burning oil, and something more organic, dried manure being prepared as fuel. Evidence suggests that without constant access to wood, families used animal remains and pressed olive pulp as a source of heat. But wait, if there is no oven, then where does the fire happen? You look away. There, in the corner of the open courtyard, there is a low, rounded structure made of hardened clay. It seems too simple, almost primitive. But this little dome is the heart of survival. A taboon, a hand-fired clay oven heated with direct heat, no temperature control, no thermometer, just experience, memory, and necessity. And that raises a question that almost no one asks. How do you cook when you can't go wrong? Because here, making mistakes doesn't mean ordering delivery. Making mistakes means not eating. The woman in front of him, maybe a mother, maybe someone like Maria, doesn't measure ingredients, does not follow recipe. She feels, she knows. Each movement is learned, repeated, passed from generation to generation without written words. And the sound continues, stone against stone, the grain being crushed slowly in a manual millstone. Archaeological evidence shows that this process could take hours every day just to produce enough flour for a single meal. And it changes everything you thought about preparing food. Because here, cooking is not a chore, it's daily survival. But that's still not the most surprising part. Because what you will notice in the next few moments will completely break the modern idea of cooking, and maybe even the way you see food today. The light now really comes in. The sun finally surpasses the hills of Galilee and invades the courtyard where you are. And it's only now clearly that you realize something essential. This kitchen is not a room. She is the center of the house, and that completely changes the logic of everything. You are not inside a separate cooking space. You are in the living heart of the house, where we cook, talk, work, raise children, live. Archaeologists discovered in excavations in Nazareth and nearby regions that first-century houses were organized around an open central courtyard, while the interior spaces were dark, used almost exclusively for sleeping or storing a few items. In other words, if something important happened, it happened here, and that includes the food. Look around more carefully. The ground is not perfectly flat. It is compacted earth, sometimes with irregular stones. There are signs of use, dark stains left by fire and oil. On one side, large ceramic vases rest against the wall. Some are tall, almost to your waist. But there are no closets, there are no shelves. And that raises another question. Where is everything stored? Evidence suggests that these vessels, called amphorae or storage jars, were responsible for virtually everything. grain, olive oil, wine, dried vegetables. Many were sealed with stone or fabric lids and stored directly in the ground or partially buried to maintain a more stable temperature. But this isn't storage as you know it. There is no abundance, no stock for weeks. There is control, enough control. And this starts to change your perception of security. Now notice the positioning of things. The tabun is not isolated. He is close to the vases, close to the preparation area, close to the water, because everything here follows a practical, almost instinctive logic. Reduce effort, reduce movement, conserve energy, because every action costs. And that brings us to something that few realize. Nothing here is done for convenience. Everything is done out of necessity. And here's the detail that changes everything. Archaeological evidence shows that many of these houses had cisterns dug directly into the rock, connected to simple rainwater collection systems. No rivers within the villages, no plumbing, no constant source. Every drop was stored with almost obsessive precision. Look at the ground near the edge of the yard. There's the opening, a circular hole for background, dark, a cistern. And that means that every meal you see being prepared depends on something that might just run out. Water is not guaranteed, fire is not guaranteed, food is not guaranteed, but still. The routine continues, and that raises a silent question that starts to grow inside you. What was it like to live every day with no guarantee of tomorrow? Because what you're seeing here isn't just an old kitchen. It is an entire system of life built on dependence, discipline, and a constant awareness of fragility. But wait, there's something even deeper going on here. Something you don't notice at first glance. And it will completely change the way you understand the act of cooking in this world. The sound continues. But now you understand what it means. It's not just stone against stone. It's the beginning of the meal. You get closer. The woman is leaning over a hand millstone. 2 circular stones, one fixed below, the other slowly rotating above. Between them, small barley grains are crushed with constant force. Archaeologists discovered dozens of these millstones in domestic excavations in Galilee, many of them worn unevenly, evidence of daily use repeated for years. And that changes something important. The food here starts with physical effort. You watch your hands. Rhythmic, firm, you need it. Every movement requires pressure. Each rotation consumes energy. Evidence suggests that producing enough flour for a family could take up to 3 hours a day, every day, without exception. But this raises an uncomfortable question. How much is a piece of bread worth when it costs hours of your body? And then something changes. She stops. With a quick gesture, he collects the flour, still thick, irregular, and mixes it with water in a simple ceramic bowl. There is no controlled yeast. There are no exact measurements, just texture, memory, experience. And here's the detail that almost no one notices. The crowd doesn't wait, because the fire doesn't wait. You turn your gaze to the tabun. The heat is already intense. The fuel, dried dung and olive remains, burns quickly, unevenly, creating temperature spikes that are difficult to predict. Archaeological evidence shows that these ovens could reach extremely high temperatures within minutes, but lost heat just as quickly. This means timing is everything. If you're late, it burns. If you get ahead, don't cook. And this completely changes the logic of preparation. Here, cooking is synchronization. She shapes the dough with her hands, and in one quick movement, sticks the raw bread to the inside wall of the oven. The sound is almost dry, a slight pop. Now, you feel it, the smell, flour heating, smoke, earth, a dense, simple, but deeply alive aroma. And then you realize something else. There is no pot constantly boiling. There are no multiple dishes being prepared at the same time. Evidence suggests that food was centered on simple preparations: bread, vegetable stews, olive oil, all made with few utensils, usually a single clay pot placed directly over hot coals. That's not variety. It's essential. But wait, take a closer look at the fire. He is not isolated. He invades the environment. The smoke rises, spreads across the courtyard, permeates clothes, skin, hair. There is no chimney. There is no exhaust fan. Archaeologists found soot residue accumulated on walls and ceilings of these houses, indicating constant exposure to smoke. And that reveals something that changes everything. Cooking here is not comfortable. It's invasive. You carry the fire in your body. And yet, nobody complains. Because each step, grinding, mixing, baking, is not optional. It's what keeps everyone alive. But there's an even deeper detail going on now. Something invisible, silent, that transforms this entire process into something bigger than just preparing food. And when you realize this, you'll never look at a simple piece of bread the same way again. And then you realize there is no surplus. The bread that just came out of the oven, still warm, slightly charred at the edges, wasn't made for later. It wasn't made for tomorrow. It wasn't made for storage. It was done for now. And it completely shatters everything you've ever believed about food. Because here, there is no refrigerator. There is no such thing as a full pantry. There is no, "I'll save it for later." Archaeologists discovered that ancient bread, especially barley, hardened within hours. No preservatives, no packaging, no humidity control. It quickly became dry, difficult to chew, almost unsuitable. In other words, or do you eat it on the day, or you lose. But that's not the most surprising thing. Look around again. You don't see excess, doesn't see variety. You don't see any options. Evidence suggests that most families lived at a level very close to subsistence, producing and consuming at almost the same speed. What was prepared in the morning sustained the day. What was prepared at night enclosed the cycle. And this creates a reality that is difficult to imagine today. You live without margin. But here's the revelation that changes everything. This limitation was not just economic, it was structural. Even if someone had more grains, more oil, more resources, still, I couldn't just stock up on ready-made food because the entire system didn't allow it. No refrigeration, no efficient airtight seal, no control against insects or fungi. Any prepared food began to degrade almost immediately. Archaeological evidence shows pest infestation in ancient containers and rapidly spoiling residues in stored foods. So think about this for a moment. It's not that they didn't want to keep it. They couldn't. And it completely changes the way you understand security. Because security, for you, is in stock. For them, it was on repeat. Don't make a diary in constant discipline. But this raises an even deeper question. What happens to your mind when you know that tomorrow everything starts again? No pause, no warranty, no accumulation. You start to notice something in her behavior. There is no desperate rush, but there is no relaxation either. There is a rhythm, a type of silent focus, almost as if each movement carries an invisible weight. but I accept it. And that reveals something powerful. The kitchen was not a comfortable place. It was a place of responsibility. And yet, there's something here you didn't expect. Something that doesn't go well with scarcity. Something that doesn't match hardness. Because even without storage, even without a guarantee, there is something present in this environment. Something that doesn't come from food. And when you realize this, you will understand that this kitchen was not just a place of survival. It was something much deeper. Now you begin to understand the risk. It's not just about cooking. It's about keeping food alive long enough to be eaten. You look at the containers again, those big ceramic vases against the wall. At first glance, they seem simple, but now you realize they are all that stands between food and loss. Archaeologists discovered that many of these vessels were partially buried in the ground to reduce temperature variation. The surrounding earth acted as a natural insulator, keeping grains and liquids a little fresher for longer. But this is not refrigeration, it's late. And that completely changes the logic, because here, preserving doesn't mean keeping for weeks. It means buying time, hours, maybe days. You approach one of the vases, inside dry grains, tough, inert, barley, lentils, maybe chickpeas. Evidence suggests that the basis of the diet depended on exactly that. Food that could survive the test of time without spoiling quickly. Not because they were preferred, but because they were possible. But there is one crucial detail. These foods are only safe while they are dry. The moment they find water, the clock starts. And this raises an invisible tension in each preparation, because when you turn grains into food, you start a process that cannot be stopped or consume or lose. But wait, look up. Ropes cross the courtyard. Small hanging beams sway lightly in the morning wind. Opened figs, herbs, maybe strips of fish, drying. Archaeological evidence shows that dehydration was one of the main preservation strategies. By removing the water, you prevent the growth of bacteria and fungi. Simple, efficient, but dependent on something that no one fully controls: the climate. Too humid, it spoils. Too fast, crack. Exposed for a long time, attracts insects, and that reveals something uncomfortable. Even when you try to preserve, you are not in control. Now, look at the oil, a thick golden liquid stored in smaller jars. Evidence suggests that olive oil was not just food, it was a preservative. It sealed surfaces, covered food, reduced exposure to air. But this also has a limit. Nothing here is permanent. Nothing here is safe for long. And that starts to put pressure on your perception, because you realize that every meal is not just prepared. She is rescued from time, rescued from decomposition, rescued from inevitable loss. But there's something even deeper going on, something that is not in the objects, it's in the decisions. How much to use, how much to save, what to risk today, knowing that tomorrow may be missing, and it creates a kind of silent tension you've never experienced. Because you live in abundance of choice. They lived in scarcity of margin. And here's the point that changes everything. Each meal was a negotiation with the future. But then, if everything is so unstable, so fragile, so uncertain, why is there no despair? Why is there no panic in this environment? There is something here that sustains these people beyond food. Something that is not in the vessels, nor in the fire, nor in the water. And when you realize what it is, you will understand that this kitchen was not Inez about keeping the body alive. It was about sustaining something much deeper. And then something changes. It's not on fire. It's not in the bread. It's not in the vases. It is in the moment before eating. You notice that no one touches the food right away. There is a pause, short but intentional. The hands that worked for hours, grinding, mixing, baking, now rest. The environment still carries the smell of smoke, the heat of the oven, the tiredness of the body, but something invisible takes center stage, a conscience. Archaeologists discovered Jewish inscriptions and practices deeply rooted in domestic life that point to something clear. Every meal was surrounded by rituals of blessing, not as a distant ceremony, but as an inseparable part of daily survival. And that changes everything, because here, eating doesn't start with hunger. It starts with recognition. A voice rises, usually the head of the household, not high, non-performative, but firm. Words repeated thousands of times throughout life. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. And that raises an unspoken question. How does someone say thank you for something they just produced with their own hands? Because you saw it. You saw the effort. You saw the work. You've seen the physical cost. But still, they don't attribute it to themselves. Evidence suggests that in the first century Jewish mindset, human labor was seen not as the origin of provision, but as participation in it. The grain grows because God allows it. The rain falls because God sustains it. The harvest exists because something beyond human control happened first. And this creates a powerful inversion. You are not the owner of the food. You are dependent on Him. Now take a closer look. Not all containers are the same. Some are made of limestone. Archaeological evidence shows that stone vessels were preferred by devout Jewish families because, under the law, they did not become ritually impure like pottery. This required more effort, more cost, but it revealed something invisible. Purity mattered, even in the kitchen. And that changes the scene completely. 'Cause now you understand, this is not just a meal, it is a space where the physical and the spiritual meet all the time. Cistern water is not just water, it's provision. Bread is not just food, it's a sign. Olive oil is not just an ingredient, it's a symbol. But wait, look at the sharing gesture. Bread is not served in individual portions. It is torn, shared, passed from hand to hand. Evidence suggests that communal meals reinforced identity, belonging, and collective responsibility. Eating alone was not the norm. It was the exception. And that reveals something profound. Survival was not individual. It was collective. And now something inside you starts to move, because you realize that this kitchen, simple, limited, fragile, supports something that goes far beyond the body. It sustains faith, not a theoretical faith, but a faith lived every day, at every meal. And that raises an inevitable question. What sustains you when everything you control disappears? Because here, they never had control. And yet, they had something you might never have fully experienced. And it starts to confront you in a way that you can no longer ignore. And now, something changes inside you, not because of what you saw, but because of what you noticed. You look again at this kitchen, the dirt floor, the unstable fire, the plain bread, the absence of excess, and for the first time, you don't see poverty. You see precision. Every element here has a purpose. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is guaranteed, and that exposes something uncomfortable. You live surrounded by food, but far from its meaning. Here, they had little, but they understood everything. Archaeologists discovered that the dietary routine in the biblical world was not just limited by resources, but structured by consciousness. Eating was a deliberate act, repeated with intention, marked by real dependence. And that raises a question that starts to grow inside you. When was the last time you really realized what you were eating? Not the taste, but the cost. Not the price, but the origin. Because here, every piece of bread carried memory, the effort of hours, the uncertainty of tomorrow, dependence on rain that might not come, and that created something that today has almost disappeared. Automatic gratitude, not as emotion, but as a reflection. Now, compare. You open a refrigerator, instant light, immediate options, comfortable silence, but something is missing. And maybe you never realized the more control you have, the less awareness you exercise. And that changes everything, because the problem was never abundance. The problem is the forgetfulness that comes with it. Evidence suggests that ancient societies developed rituals and practices not just for religion, but as memory mechanisms. Each blessing, each gesture, each daily repetition was a way of not forgetting the spirit essential. And you? How many essential things have you failed to notice? But here's the deeper point. They lived without security. You live with excess guarantees. And yet, who seems most at peace? You start to feel it, not as an idea, but as a confrontation, because this kitchen exposes something you can't ignore. You exchanged dependence for control. But maybe I missed something along the way, something that cannot be bought, something that cannot be stored, something that cannot be produced on demand. Presence, conscience, real gratitude. And this leads to a question that can no longer be avoided. If everything you have today disappeared, what would still sustain you? Because in that simple courtyard, in that kitchen, with no modern oven, no storage, no guarantee, they had something that didn't spoil, something that never ended, something that didn't depend on tomorrow. And now, you need to decide if this is also part of your life or not. And now, the fire begins to subside. The embers still glow inside the taboon, but they no longer have the same strength. The heat slowly recedes, as if the day itself were breathing more slowly. The meal ended. The remains, few, are collected carefully, not out of excess, but out of respect. Every crumb still matters. Archaeologists discovered that even fragments of hardened bread were reused in broths, or softened again in water or olive oil. Nothing was discarded without purpose, and that says something silent. Until the end of the meal, I was conscious. You look around once more. The courtyard is calmer now. The voices died down. The smell of smoke is still in the air, trapped in the walls, on clothes, on the skin. And then you realize this kitchen was never just about food. It was about rhythm, about repetition, about remembering every day. Something that today you easily forget. But here's the point that changes everything. They did not live expecting abundance. They lived trusting in continuity. The next dawn, next grind, the next flame lit with effort. And that creates something powerful, a life that does not depend on excess, but on presence. But wait, there is something even deeper hidden in all this, because that kitchen, that fire, that bread, that water appears again. Centuries later, On a simple table, when a man takes the bread, he gives thanks. He breaks it and hands it over, not as a routine, but as a revelation. And at that moment, everything you saw here takes on another meaning. Bread is no longer just survival, and it becomes a symbol. Fire is no longer just heat, and it becomes preparation. The table is no longer just a meal, and it becomes a meeting. And that raises a question that spans time and comes to you now. Do you still see the value of what sustains your life? Or has everything become too automatic? Because maybe the problem has never been the lack of food, but the lack of awareness about it. And now you upload this image, this simple kitchen, that unstable fire, this bread made with effort, and maybe, starting today, you'll never look at a meal the same way again. So tell me, which detail impacted you the most? Was it the absence of storage, the effort to produce something so simple, or the fact that even with so little, there was so much awareness? If this experience made you see something new, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who needs to rediscover the value of what they have. And now I want to ask you something deeper. If you had to go back to this kitchen, live exactly like this, would you be prepared, or would you realize you missed something essential along the way?